Greetings to all the Jackson Janets out there, and welcome to your daily dose of donkey with Ginger Sports Talk. I'm your host, the Viking Donkey, and once again, I'll be coming to you solo, so you're gonna get to hear my inner thoughts monologued here. Probably gonna be a quick one as well. Off season, dead part of the off season. I ain't got no one else out here to talk about rankings with, so I mean, what are we gonna do? Just hear more of my rankings, hear more of anything I feel in particular going on. I mean, there are some news stories out there if you want to consider them all. I mean, we got Barcavius Mingo just got arrested for Atlanta. I believe they terminated his contract right away as it was alleged under age sex dealios or and that's never good. I mean, Kenny Clark just got arrested for the second time this offseason, this time with an Uzi in his car. He's a pass rusher for the Kansas City Chiefs. Big loss for them as he's been really, really productive. If something comes of it, looks like he might get charged with a felony. He is trying to claim it was, it was his securities that left it loaded in the back of his Lamborghini, because that's exactly what it seems like after you already got pulled over this offseason with a loaded handgun and rifle earlier. I mean, oh yeah, man, just you got to carry it for protection, do it the right way. Second off, don't, if you're going to blame it on your security, make sure you always have your security with you so it can be, he can take the fall for you. It's just, sometimes I think people forget they have lots of money and can do things to help them out. And it's just like, oh, then huge hit for Kansas City if it comes to be him getting charged with this and facing 3 years in federal prison. I mean, huge mistake by him if that was in fact his. And still, even if it was a security guard, still a huge mistake by the security guard leaving it in there. And just, I don't know, the weird things that you got to look at and say are news going on in the offseason, because there isn't much news at this point of the offseason right before camp starts, because no one's doing anything. No one's signing anyone. No one's even competing. I mean, it's just, July is probably the worst season to talk about football, so you gotta manufacture some topics. With that, I guess we could manufacture going into some Steeler news with T.J. Watt getting engaged. I mean, congratulations are due here, and yeah, that's about all the Steeler news that's come out. I mean, I've been reading some things, some people saying some stuff. Let's just say a guy I'm not gonna name from ESPN who said Ben was gonna get benched last year is just, I guess he's just going to stay on the horse until Ben does get benched. And I've talked about, do you pull the plug if the Steelers aren't playing well? But I don't know. I don't see Ben getting benched because I don't see the Steelers ever being out of it. And I don't feel, unless they're out of it, that they'll bench Ben unless he is playing absolutely horrid. So it's hard to see how that's going to happen. And I know ESPN's trying to get some clickbait comments, clickbait articles, because, well, they don't report on news anymore. They don't report on sports anymore. I mean, all they report on is gossip, because that's all the current culture cares about, is the gossip news that's going on. And that's what you got to cater to, I guess, in this day and age. But for the main part of the show today, I wanted to go through and I wanted to start looking at some Steeler fantasy values, because it is getting close to that time of fantasy drafts. What's going on? Who are the players you're looking at? Who are the players you'd like to pick, and who are the players you'd like to avoid? I'm out here looking at going into the fantasy draft. Let's start top to bottom with the Steelers. Maybe next week we'll bring you the AFC North, because that's kind of what we cover, so you can compare how I view they are, how I'd view their rankings for players across the AFC North teams. But let's start with, do you draft them? Do you don't draft them? Let's start with Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, late round backup starts you one game a year quarterback. You could look at taking him. Do I think he's a guy you draft and hope to be a big part of your offense? I don't know. I mean, last year, you have to remember the second half of the year was terrible for Ben. He only threw for 3,800 yards, 33 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, but the end of the year was really, really bad for him. So if you had him essentially outside of the Indy game going into the end of the season for playoff time, he just you. And I don't see that improving this year, with all talks of the Steelers gonna focus on improving the running game. So I think starting at the top, starting with the quarterback, it's a big avoid for me. I don't think Ben Roethlisberger improves those numbers. I know there's another game going to happen this year, but I think his numbers actually go down totals. I think he throws for less yards. I think he throws for less touchdowns. I think he throws for more interceptions. I think he has a very coming of age year, and it's going to show. And I'm just not, I don't know. I'm not on board with the draft, Ben. And no, I'm definitely not on board with, let's take one of the Steelers' younger guys and see if we can stash him in case he becomes a starter. I think that'd be a crazy thing to do. Please, please, please don't do it. I mean, if you do and you come out looking smart, you can come back here and tell me, see, I told you, I know better than you. And if you feel you do, you can come on and I will gladly let you co-host a show with me and we could talk about it. We can hash it out. We could just have a good conversation, if you know what I mean. So that brings us to running backs. And does anyone believe that any of these running backs are going to produce anything outside of, I don't know, maybe our first round pick will. I have some faith in Najee Harris. I think he's a guy who's going to fade a little bit down the stretch, though, so careful with playoffs. Make sure you have something there to time, because rookies at the end of the year, especially running backs, can get worn down, especially a guy who's been injury-prone towards the end of seasons when in Alabama. But if you're talking Benny Snell, Anthony McFarland, Jalen Samuels, Keelan Ballage, I don't see any of them as really a pick. I mean, maybe McFarland if you're in one of those leagues where just you have a lot of teams and you have to fill your roster. Maybe then a guy like McFarland's playable, but really I see about 1,000 yards, 8 touchdown-ish coming out of the Steelers running back core, and I think most of that is going to go to the presumptive starter, Najee Harris. I think the Steelers do focus more on the run, so maybe it's more like 1,400 yards. But you're talking all these guys last year averaged under 4 yards a carry outside of James Conner, and he's not here. So all the other backs are coming back with a line that maybe's better, maybe's worse, honestly looks rather similar. So I wouldn't expect a huge uptick from any of those guys. Maybe McFarland gets used better in the new offense under Canada, but I would not play that. The receiving core, boy. Ebron is a low-end tight end you could look at if you don't get one of the top, let's say, 10 or so. Ebron's not a bad choice, as Ben has had a history of having great years with tight ends, and maybe he'll be comfortable with Ebron. I think Freiermuth is an absolute avoid. I think you avoid the lower end guys like James Washington and below. I think Chase Claypool actually has a pretty good season and takes over the number 1 spot this year. I think his numbers, though, are very similar to last year. The reason he takes over the number 1 spot is I feel this passing game just as a whole throws for less yards. So by doing that, everyone takes a step down. Claypool gets right around that 1,000-yard mark. That puts him number 1. I think Deontay Johnson falls into that 850-yard mark. And I mean, he's a playable wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in fantasy through the year. Like I said, I don't know. I think 800 about 7-8 touchdowns, 850 is what you're looking for from him. I think you see Claypool get right around that 1,000-yard mark, and I think he puts up double-digit touchdowns this year, 10. So I think he's a good draft as a low wide receiver 1, high wide receiver 2 type of guy. So probably the earliest you look to draft a Steeler, I think, would be Chase Claypool, or depending on if you're one of those leagues that takes a quick run on running backs, Najee Harris. I think the guy most set to disappoint this year is everyone's expecting Juju to have a huge year, a huge breakback with Ben back, with this new gonna open up for him, but I just don't see it happening. I don't think he improves his numbers from last year. I think he's very, very similar to his numbers from last year. I think yards per catch go up, but I think his receptions go down. I still think he's a low 800-yard, 5 to 9 touchdown type of guy. So you're talking same area as Deontay Johnson, but I think Juju Smith-Schuster's that guy who's going to get drafted first of all the Steelers playmakers, and I think that's very, very, very risky because I don't think Juju's going to put up the numbers everyone thinks he does. I mean, this is a guy who, yeah, he put up some really nice numbers when playing opposite Antonio Brown, but everyone's going to focus on him. And if you've watched the Steelers the last couple of years, you realize when teams focus on him, he doesn't have the greatest ability to separate. He hasn't had the greatest ability to put up those big numbers. I mean, you're talking a guy who went 900 yards his first year, 1,400 yards in that huge breakout second year. And then he dropped down to 500 yards, but I mean, it was 46 yards per game, so not the biggest drop down when you consider he only averaged 51 yards a game last year and had 831 yards. Now, everyone, take all my numbers and add an extra game worth of numbers to them, because I keep forgetting there's going to be 17 games this year, but I still don't see. The fact of the matter is I still see him being a low 2, high 3 wide receiver guy, but people are going to draft him to be that low 1, high 2. That's why I think Juju is the guy you should avoid most on the Steelers roster, because you're talking about a guy who has diminishing play since he's been the focal point, and once again is going to be the focal point. Even if Chase Claypool breaks out pretty early, I still think teams are going to focus a little more on Juju, just because throwing those slot passes, I think, is going to be what Ben wants to do a lot this year. And I think what's really going to hold Claypool back is, I think, the deep ball accuracy of the quarterbacks in general on the Pittsburgh Steelers is just not going to be up to snuff to get him the yardage he should. I think he has the absolute potential to be a superstar, but I just don't feel this is the year, fantasy-wise, that Claypool is going to get the huge breakout into top tier status. I think he's going to stay firmly cemented in that lower top end, which is what he was starting to break into last year even a little bit, and takes a little step farther this year. Then we get into, what's the next? Kickers. Boswell's a pretty safe bet. The way he makes field goals and the way the Steelers have been not as dominant in red zone touchdowns since losing Le'Veon Bell, let's be honest. Since those years, we haven't been that dominant in the red zone. You need a good kicker. We're not afraid to kick field goals. I think Boswell is... he did only make 20 field goals last year, so I guess we didn't kick that many field goals. Low-end kicker pick, but then again, if you know me in fantasy football, you know I believe kickers and defenses should never be drafted till the very last pick, and they should be things that are rotated based on matchups. You should look for a guy who has a good matchup and play him. I think Boswell's one of those guys when you're playing a team that holds teams to field goals and it's a good matchup for the Steelers, he's one of those guys you pick up and play. If it's a team that just absolutely doesn't give up field goals because either they don't give up points or you just score touchdowns against them, I think he's a non-play. So same going there. Steelers defense, I think, will be solid this year. You're talking a top 10 unit probably, which is a downgrade from where we've been the last 2 years, where we've been a top 5. I think they stay a top 10 unit. I think the sacks go down. I think the turnovers go down. But still, it's a good unit to play, a good unit to have. But again, matchups are what matter to me in defenses, so I would not draft them unless they were there in one of the last 2 rounds, which everyone always seems to take defenses a little early. But if they're there and you want them, or you're just one of those people who likes to take the defense early and you're wondering, I think they're a solid pick. Really tough schedule could be a really big problem for them. It could lead to a lot of tough games and a lot of games where they don't put up what you expect. I don't know how the pass rush is going to hold up, but we'll see. And then we get into individual player picks. On defense, we'll go into defensive players. We'll talk about a few of them. Devin Bush will probably be a fancy pick because middle linebackers rack up tackles, do all that. I'd be a little cautious about taking him, as he'll probably be a guy, unless you play in a league with a bunch of Steelers fans, who will be a free agent, and you can watch the first couple games to see how he's really playing, how healthy he really is, before making the decision to make him your defensive impact player. That being said, there is one defensive impact player I think you should pick up. That is TJ Watt. He is going to put up numbers no matter what. Maybe they're not going to be as good as they were last year with Highsmith manning the other side instead of Bud Dupree. But he's going to put up good numbers. I think he's the kind of generational talent that will succeed no matter what system he's put into. So he has the ability to be that lockdown defender, as I'm here in lockdown in the prison. And you got to take him. I think he's when you see defensive players like Aaron Donald start going, I think he's the guy. If you're looking to take a Steeler to have be your guy, he's the one you want to take at that time. And I hope if he's available for you, he puts up the numbers we expect because that'll be a huge part to the Steelers having a good season. Now, guys, I would look to avoid, and there's going to be a couple different reasons for this. One, Alex Highsmith is getting talked up a bunch by Steeler fans, and a lot of people expect big production. I personally would avoid him, as I don't see him as the type of guy who puts up more than league average production. And most leagues, even if you have to play like a linebacker, defensive lineman, cornerback, I'm not sure that he's up there in that echelon of guys you'd want to play, unless you're just one of those people who's like, well, losing 3 points here doesn't matter. I'll play a guy I just like. And I also have a feeling the Steelers might try to add a veteran in here that will limit his snaps. So Highsmith is one guy I would really avoid. I would also probably avoid a guy like Minkah Fitzpatrick, who is an absolute stud, but teams just don't throw the ball at him, and he doesn't bring much to the table tackling. So he's not going to give you the tackle stats, and if teams aren't throwing the ball that way, he's not going to get interceptions. I would avoid Joe Hayden like the plague because he looked like he lost a step last year, and, well, he's now going to be a year older, and that doesn't tend to go well for cornerbacks. When you lose a step, you go to the next year. But we'll see. I hope he has a great year, but I would avoid Joe Hayden. And then probably the two surprises, but this isn't based off play. This is purely based off I don't trust Cam Hayward and Stephen Tuitt to stay healthy this whole year. Very rarely have the two of them stayed healthy together for a full season, and there's no hurt in taking them early, especially if you're in one of the leagues that have 3 defensive positions, so you have to have a lineman. But if you're in one of the ones where you only play in one, I'd be very cautious of taking 2 aging players on an extra long season who are coming off relatively healthy seasons. And I know that's the weird thing to say but they were healthy last year. Yeah, but 2 guys who always seem to get hurt every other year at least, if they're coming off the healthy year, that's the year I'm afraid of. I hope nothing happens, but tradition says, bad stuff's going to happen for the Steelers. And that has it for my wrap on the take of what I see Steeler players doing, how I see them acting. I guess if you're in one of those spots where you get to have a kick returner, punt returner, I didn't cover Ray McCloud. Yeah, he looks like he's explosive, but honestly, he didn't do much, and we still have Danny Smith, so don't expect much out of a return game for us. So I would avoid him as your kick returner because I just don't trust in Danny Smith at all. And now that will actually do it for my wrap of the fantasy preview for your Pittsburgh Steelers. I really hope my additions help you and don't hurt you. I hope they work out for you if you decide to listen to them. If you don't, well, hey, I don't blame you either. I'm not sure if I know what I'm doing when it comes to fantasy anymore, as the rules have changed so much. I guess I should have said all of mine for standard scoring leagues. Let's go over that first. I don't do PPR, but if you did PPR, that changes the look on Juju and Deontay Johnson. That knocks them up a bump because they tend to catch the ball a lot. So I think if you do PPR, couple changes have to happen on my thing, but otherwise, those are my rankings for standard score. Like I said, PPR, really the only changes would be Juju and Deontay. And I really hope the Steelers all outperform what I say, because if they do, that means we are having one hell of a season, as everyone is putting up outstanding numbers and everyone is adding to the road for another Super Bowl. Who knows? Maybe this year the road to the Super Bowl is paved in black and gold, and all we can do is hope that that is the case. Anyway, I'd love to see anyone else's ranking out there. If anyone has their own rankings, put them in the comments. Leave them for me. Let me know. Next week, maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll do something else. Who knows? We'll see how the fantasy thing goes. We'll see how people like it. But it's that time for a shout-out. So, of course, got to give a shout-out to the only Steeler with super-duper positive news coming this week, and that is TJ Watt. So, TJ Watt, thank you for getting engaged. No, I'm just kidding. Congratulations to you. I only said thank you because I got distracted as Bugaboo came out here to join the conversation. Do you want to say hi to the people? And say hello. Yeah, he's here to come to my room. Well, anybody, that's my shout out. That does it for me. You know where to reach me. Viking_donkey on Twitch or Twitter. You can reach me at Viking Donkey on Xbox. You can reach me at the Daily Dose of Donkey with Ginger on YouTube. Leave us a comment there. Let me know how I'm doing. Maybe we'll get a whole crew together, do a big roundtable ranking of our Steelers versus everybody else in football land for your fantasy world. But until then, Steeler Nation, you know what to do. Wave them if you got them. Hey, you want to take them out, Bugboo? You want to say wave them if you got them? And there you go. That's how we're ending it.